Please stop. The audacity. Yay, it stopped. Okay. You're probably here today because you suspect you may be on the spectrum and want to understand better what autistic masking is and how your mask manifests. Whether your mask and your experience is similar or dissimilar to others on the spectrum. Or maybe you know you're autistic and you are professionally or self-diagnosed and you're sitting here because you are suffering from an imposter syndrome and you are questioning whether your autistic experience are correct. What is correct? Because of the lack of research in this area and the versatility in how autism can present between individuals. So in today's video, I'm going to discuss what autistic masking is, or clinically referred to as camouflaging behaviour, the purpose of masking, how a mask can manifest, the consequences of masking, and I'll finish with my take on what I think the difference between an autistic mask and a neurotypical mask is. Hey, I'm Rebecca and welcome to my channel. My channel's aim is to create a space that validates and legitimizes neurodiverse individuals' struggles that people have questioned their whole life, in the hope that it makes them feel less alone in their experiences of the world. Hopefully I can help eradicate the harmful stereotypes, schemas and misnomers that are siloed to each neurotype, those that perpetually hurt neurodiverse individuals. For example, the autistic stereotype of a little boy who likes trains, who is socially inept, is harmful because so many people present so differently to that, and it means those people receive misdiagnosis or miss a diagnosis altogether, and it just annoys me. And a quick disclaimer, I'm not a physician, I'm not a therapist, although I would like to be a psychiatrist one day, so we all have goals. And the information I've relayed today is purely from personal experience, anecdotal evidence, and that which I've read within the scientific literature. Please be cognizant of the fact that a lot more research needs to be done within the area of autistic masking and how it can present, as it is very limited at the moment. I also think the research needs to be a little bit more inclusive with regarding gender diversity as well. But let's get on with the video. So what is autistic masking? Masking, or camouflaging, means to hide or disguise parts of oneself to better fit in with those around you. And everyone masks to some degree, but for autistics, the behaviour is more ingrained because despite personal costs, autistic individuals will consciously or subconsciously mask, adapt, or hide their innate autistic characteristics and traits to appear more typical. And often the mask's characteristics have been dictated to fit around and within neurotypical standards. Individuals feel as though they must hide themselves, their true selves, in order to fit in to non-autistic culture. And I can speak for the whole of the autistic community. It sucks.
Okay, let's move on.
And if you are autistic, you're probably looking back at your whole life and starting to pick apart and realise when your mask was subconscious versus when it started to become conscious behaviour. Because when you were young, not only did you not have the self-awareness, because obviously you hadn't really developed that executive function, and actually, considering we all have executive dysfunction, depending on how delayed that development is, you may not even have it now. Irrespective of what I just said, you may find that during adolescence, societal rules and the unwritten rules of social inclusion and acceptance weren't really a conscious thought because of their lack of importance at the time. Like, what 10-year-old is going to care about a social hierarchy and where you stand on it? They probably don't even know what hierarchy means. Unless you do. Like, if you do, or if you did, wow, like, wow, go you. But I didn't. But it was probably only when the social and the popularity hierarchy became important that you found the need to notice and start analysing your social difficulties and find reasoning for the perpetual errors you seem to make regarding social communication, maintaining, forming relationships. And at the time, you were probably unaware of why you struggled. But you knew you struggled, and you were aware that you found certain things so much harder than others, and you just felt different because of it. And finding words to articulate this struggle with social information processing is hard enough as an adult, like, let alone as a hormone spiking adolescent. Like, that was not going to happen. And this may have been when you started to look into the unwritten rules of society. You drew more focus to them, the social standards and rules that you innately didn't understand. And over time you learnt these rules. You started to consciously follow them because at the time that seemed to be the only way to achieve social inclusion and acceptance. And I think there's this massive misconception that autistic people don't want friends. They don't want connection. We are human. We desire the basic fundamentals of human capacity.
Look at Maslow's hierarchy.
We all want to form connections. We want friends. It's just harder to find the right ones that are accepting of our differences and understand that our requirements of maintaining and forming social relationships will be slightly different. And it's just a little bit harder to find those people. But when you find them, you never let them go. Hannah, I'm looking at you through this camera. Hannah's my friend, but you probably already got that. And to better understand what autistic masking is and the purpose of it, I think it's worth looking at what the word actually means. So what is a mask? By definition, a mask implies something that does not exist. A mask is a facade, an illusion, an outward appearance. At face value, it will be flawless, but that's the purpose of a mask. Its job is to imply something that is not there. Now transfer this to an autistic's mask. The mask is there to conceal their autistic characteristics and their struggles. It is there to imply they are like everyone else, like every other neurotypical individual, someone who does not deviate from the normal. A mask is a survival tactic and a strategy of social inclusion because of the stigma associated with the innate autistic characteristics and behaviours. And although the individual may appear normal, their experience underneath this mask is entirely different, almost probably anyway. And like, it's not my fault, I did my job really well. I laugh, but it's not funny. Like, and if you've had this phenomenal realisation that you are indeed autistic, yay, first and foremost, but also you're probably going through multiple phases of self-acceptance, self-understanding, grief, confusion. You're probably questioning your relationships, your self-identity, who really knows you, who you unmasked with, if at all, what parts of yourself you created, what parts you warped, and what parts you completely covered and concealed. And that's hard. A lot of people don't acknowledge it, but it's hard. So why do autistic individuals mask? What motivates an individual to hide their true self? The literature studying, well, the limited literature, concluded that the main overarching motivations to why an autistic develops this mask are A, their strong desire, yet uncertainty in securing social acceptance, forming connections, and being valued by others, which is a basic human desire, which people need to understand. We all want connection. Like, and B, it is developed over time as a strategy to help socialise in a world with a different communication style to their own. A way I try to elucidate the implicit motives are by describing autistic individuals as being born with a different rulebook or rule set compared to that a neurotypical is born with. So unfortunately, like the autistic individual doesn't receive a neurotypical's rulebook, a neurotypical won't receive an autistic's rulebook. And the only way they become aware of each other's way of communicating is through interaction. But unfortunately for autistic individuals, they've drawn the short straw because they have been placed into a world that plays only by the neurotypical rules. Maybe you've suffered a lifetime of negative social experiences with non-autistic others. Maybe you don't know why you continue to make social faux pas. Or maybe you understand why you do it, but you don't know how to stop. Maybe your inability to form and maintain relationships has led you to internalising those struggles, attributing them to your faulty interpersonal behaviours and self-presentation differences. Maybe that is why you felt motivated and felt forced to mask, because being yourself all those years did nothing helpful anyway. And you weren't just going to sit there idly and be a social outcast. You were going to try your absolute best to be socially included, no matter how you got there. And if you do relate to that, I am truly sorry for your experience, because I do get it, and not feeling valued and not feeling accepted is honestly one of the worst feelings. So how can a mask manifest, and why can a mask look so different between individuals? Masking can involve the alteration of both interpersonal and intrapersonal characteristics and behaviours. And because this is an emerging area of research, please take everything I say with a pinch of salt. I don't want to be sued. Thank you. But the way I try to explain this difference in how a mask can present or manifest is by looking at the categories and the symptoms within these categories within an ASD profile. So each category of symptoms will show divergence from the neurotypical normal. For one person, they may have a more significant divergence within the category of language, so they are non-verbal, whereas for another, they may be the opposite and show a smaller divergence from the neurotypical standard, which means they can articulate themselves very, very well. One individual may have a greater divergence in the sensory processing category, so their sensory aversions are more debilitating than another individual whose divergence is smaller. This is why it's a spectrum disorder. This is what annoys me about how we silo very specific presentation to the one condition, like but this also transfers and exemplifies why a mask would manifest differently. Because if each category of symptoms diverges to varying magnitudes, then the autistic's mask is going to vary according to the divergences. Because it's highly likely that your most significant divergence in whatever category of autistic symptoms is your greatest struggle regarding fitting in. So your mask's main purpose is to cater for that divergence, that greatest struggle. And if you look at these categories of symptoms, they would include things like social awareness, picking up and using social cues, language being social communication skills, using and interpreting body language, eye contact, information processing, learning material and then transferring it to a different situation, sensory processing, or repetitive behaviours, fixated, restricted interests. They're all categories of symptoms that you would see within an autistic profile. And each category will have symptoms of different severity because each breadth of divergence from the neurotypical standard will vary. And this is really good for expounding the concept of a spectrum, because this is why we see each autistic having different strength and weakness profiles, because the functionality of each category of autistic symptoms will vary. It will be different. I hope that made sense. I don't know. I'm not certain. And take myself as an example. I'm highly aware of social rules because I've learnt them, but still my inability to adapt and transfer the information to the situation is very poor, and my information processing is quite delayed. So this means that I'm very rigid regarding my social communication skills to cater for my inability to adapt and process the situation quickly. I don't necessarily mimic the behaviours of the social partner in the moment, but I did use and do use my keen observance combined with the learning of the social rules to create a mask that people are more drawn to and more accepting of. So, for example, at surface level, people seemed to be much more comfortable and open towards extroverted people. They had nothing to hide. It's funny how people subconsciously fear deceitfulness. They want altruism, but we all act opposing this. It's just really weird. Oh well. But if you look, those who spoke with charisma had significant changes in the tone of their voice, added this aspect of entertainment to their personality, which then helped the social partner remain attentive and engaged. And that worked perfectly for me because I struggled to understand what someone's nonverbal behaviours, such as body language, was saying, noticing when someone's bored or not. And this strategy almost compensated to some extent for that weakness. It limited the ability to fail because of it. So my created skill set, talking too much, being overly exaggerative, overusing my hand gestures, my facial expressions, and using the unusual modulation of the tone of my voice, it all created success, if not accounting for unauthentic relationships formed, because unfortunately, when people don't really know who you are attracting people who complement your false persona. And although this mask did work, I still struggle to maintain relationships in a way that suits the neurotypical population, because every relationship is different. There are so many rules, nuances that are just not transferable to each individual, and it freaking sucks. Although this mask did work, the cracks in my mask did show, but the observer had to have a sharp eye in order to notice the inconsistency. So my mask will be different to your mask, mask because my mask was hiding and compensating for my most prominent divergences, which will almost certainly be different from yours. For example, if someone has a greater divergence within the category of repetitive behaviour than I do, they are probably going to develop a mask to do with their whole body stims, such as rocking, spinning, hand flapping. They're very cliche, but I'm using them as an example. That mask will help that individual redirect their whole body stims to more subtle, covert movements, such as fiddling with your hair, picking your nails, biting the inside of your cheek, picking hair out of your head. Some self-destructive behaviours, might I add, and they will suppress a very healthy, self-soothing and self-regulating behaviour because of the fear of how non-autistic people will react. It's so wrong, but that is why I'm here. The consequences of masking. Masking is cognitively taxing, exhausting and difficult to sustain because the behaviours are effortful and challenging. Things that just come naturally without thought are very conscious for some autistic individuals, and I think the cognitive demand for that individual will depend on their profile divergences, strengths are and where their weaknesses lie, and what they have to do in order to compensate for them. A lot of autistics have to monitor the social communication intricacies and nuances. It's not a natural flowing back and forth thing, whereas I think for a neurotypical, all they have to do really is keep track of the conversational topic. And I think for an autistic person, they have to manage so many thoughts like, am I talking too much? Am I talking too little? Am I talking too much and not noticing? Am I going on tangents? Have I asked enough questions? Is the conversation equally weighted? Is the person bored? What's their body language saying? Am I noticing it? Is it correct? Are they engaged? Are they faking engagement? And on top of this, then you have sensory aversions to contend with, and you end up just walking away from the conversation really confused and totally unaware of whether it went well, whether the person likes you, and you just automatically assume that it didn't go well, that they don't like you. Because you don't know. Oh, the autistic life. Woo! Why did I do that? My take on what I think the difference between an autistic mask and a neurotypical mask is, quite frankly, every individual in society masks to some degree. Everyone develops and puts on a slightly warped persona of themselves depending on what setting they're in, because society favours specific characteristics in certain settings. For example, compare a neurotypical in a professional environment versus them in a socially relaxed environment. They will present themselves accordingly. At work, they will emphasise their personality traits and qualities admired that are fitting with the role, and these will probably be muffled during a socially relaxed context. But the underlying drivers of the masks seem to be different. Notice a neurotypical mask is not falsifying their innate traits. They do not change their entire persona or parts of themselves in all settings. They just draw attention to the right ones depending on the environment they're in. And actually, neurotypicals are indeed very, very exceptional at knowing and understanding the social context and adapting their behaviour to it. To expound this comparison between an autistic mask and a neurotypical mask and the consequences of the process on that individual, I will use the very imperfect version of the square peg and round hole analogy, where an autistic represents this square peg and in my version a neurotypical represents an oval peg. And notice the oval shape will not perfectly fit the round hole due to mass manufacturing processes, let's just say that, but with a little bit of force, a little extra force, it will fit, and this extra force is their neurotypical mask. The peg will fit and there will not be a significant change in its shape, whereas an autistic, a square peg, will hammer themselves into that round hole, resulting in a very noticeable change in shape to the point of irreversible damage. The mask's impact on the internal state of the individual is different because the driver of the mask is different. And I think this is a major issue with autistic masking because it creates the illusion that everything is okay, that that person is swimming, that they're not damaging themselves to look and behave in the way they are. But in reality, the individual is struggling. And if the mask came off long enough, you'd notice them drowning. You'd notice the irreparable damage that is occurring. And unfortunately, I think this drowning or irreversible damage can be seen and manifest within symptoms of mental illness, eating disorders, anxiety, addiction, depression. All of these symptoms are manifestations of the individual's inability to cope with their internal and external stressors. They have been pushing swimming, hammering themselves for so long that they have reached a point that has exceeded their limit. I think masking is a thing that contributes to the such high rates of comorbid mental illness within this community of people, because we are trying to find ways to cope, and these unfortunately are self-destructive. And to end the video, I will draw attention to the fact that all autistic individuals are different, and I do not speak for all autistics, and it is perfectly fine if you do not relate to what I've discussed in this video. Irrespective of that, I hope you did enjoy the video and I hope you found some value in what I had to say. And if you can tolerate my consistent inconsistency, subscribe. See you in the next video.